Good evening. You have joined the YouTube Bible study for the University Baptist Church of College Park, Maryland. My name is John Burns, and I am the pastor of that church. And ever so often, we post a YouTube Bible study on the same Bible studies that we're studying in the interactive virtual Bible studies online and in the one in-person Bible study that we have here at the church during this pandemic. We invite you to join either of those. You can go to our website and find a way to join the virtual one where we can talk back and forth, or you can come in person to the in-person Bible study on Wednesday nights here at 7 o'clock, or you can just watch this one because it's posted and then you can watch it anytime that you have opportunity. This is the fifth session in Paul Tillich's book, The New Being. We have been looking at various chapters from his book, and tonight we look at session 5, which the title of it is, What is Truth? And we live in a time where truth is sort of a very precious commodity because I think it's harder to know if somebody's telling us the truth these days. Do you have somebody in your life who you can always count on to tell you the truth? One writer said that the only people who tell truth are small children and old adults because they have no filter. And so they just call them like they see them. They just tell you how things look to them. Other people say, no, the people who love me most tell you the truth, and sometimes that is true. But other times, I don't know. Have you ever watched American Idol? And in the tryout session, there are always a few contestants who sing horribly. Well, why didn't the people that love them tell them they sang horribly before they got on national TV and humiliated themselves? And the reason is because sometimes those who love us the most, they can't bear to tell us the truth if it's a little bit negative. So maybe they're not that reliable. The great singing group Sweet Honey in the Rock, one of their members said that she grew up in a house that had no mirrors. And so she got dressed for school every day and stood before her grandmother and asked, do I look right? Do I look presentable? And the grandmother would say, oh, you're the most beautiful person on the face of the earth. You're the most lovely little girl in all the school. And that's how she grew up believing that was true. And it wasn't until she left that home and began to be around other people that she realized that she was attractive enough, but she was not the most beautiful woman to ever walk the face of the earth. So sometimes our loved ones don't tell us exactly the truth. We have to find somebody who we can depend on to be truthful with us. And that's harder these days. Part of it is because integrity has kind of gone by the wayside. And people who we once, I should say this way, people who once felt a burden to be truthful no longer feel that burden. We have political leaders who lie all the time. We know that commercials and people trying to get our money lie to us all the time, but we even have academics who lie to get prestige or get published or for other reasons. So the people we used to rely on, preachers, we've had a number of preachers through the years who have turned out to be not telling us the truth about their own personal life or about the finances of the church or about many other things. So people we once thought you can trust them to tell the truth, even lawyers and judges have been found to be deceitful in the court of law, standing before a court of law. So it's harder to tell. Then you have all of technology, which makes it more difficult to know, even when you're looking at something, am I seeing the truth? A member of our church this week sent me a video where some people are gathered in a gym. Maybe you've seen this. And as they look out on the basketball court floor, A whale comes up out of that floor, does a 360 in the air, and comes back down on the floor, splashing what appears to be water all over the wooden surface. Now, of course, none of that happened, but when you see the video, you'd swear that somehow they got a whale to come up out of a gym floor, because technology can create a situation that is not true. What do you use to determine whether something is true or not? Do you just follow your gut? Do you just kind of listen to whatever is going on inside? That's maybe a good way. Also can be a problematic way. Do you rely on experts to tell you the truth? We hear a lot about that. What does science say? What does the data say? Yet all that can be manipulated as well. Do you wait on the majority to decide what the truth is? That has its flaws too. Or do you just rely on your own experience? If you haven't seen it, held it, touched it, smelled it, then you're not going to believe it. That's another way to go, for sure. Or maybe you wait on repetition. If something happens once, then you might believe it's not true or shady or uncertain. But if you can see a pattern, maybe that would convince you of truth. Some of us believe in revealed truth. That is, that there are powers beyond ourselves who reveal to us truth that we cannot comprehend from our own experience. I don't know what you use to determine truth, but Tillich is saying for him, truth is found in Jesus Christ, and he's going to spell that out in this chapter. Before he does so, though, he prints a lot of scriptures, so I'm going to read them. They have kind of a waterfall cascading effect. There's several of them, but they all deal with truth. And they all also happen to be from the Gospel of John, and I'll explain probably why that is in a minute. Very first chapter, we read this from John 1:14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. And then in verse 17, for the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Then John 8:43 and 44. Why do you not understand what I say? Jesus asked. It's because you are of your father, the devil. Wow. He was a murderer from the beginning and has nothing to do with truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks according to his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Well, now we know where deceit comes from. John 18, verses 37 and 38. Pilate said to him, so you are a king? And Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? John 14:6, Jesus said to them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 3:21, he who does what is true comes to the light. John 14:16 and 17, and I will pray to the Father, and he will give to you the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. John 16:13. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all the truth. 1 John 4:7 and 8. Let us love one another, for love is of God, and he who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. That didn't have the word truth in it, but it has the word love in it. And as we'll see, Paul Tillich says they have to go together. They cannot be separated. And the last one that Tillich puts in his book is John 8:31-32. You could have expected this one. Jesus then said to the Jews who had believed in him, if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. John was very invested in this understanding of truth. One of the main reasons is because John was written after it's becoming clear to the temple and the synagogue that these Christians were different than the Jewish faith. Up until that point, there was a hope among the Christians that they could reform Judaism and find a place in it. But by this point in time, it had become clear no, that just wasn't going to happen. So then you have competitive truths. Who are you going to listen to? Moses? You're going to follow all that revealed truth from Moses and deny that Jesus is the bearer of truth? Or are you going to put your trust in the words of Jesus, who came to tell us a clearer truth about God? Well, that divides the communities of faith even today. That's why we have different religious traditions. But the Gospel of John is advocating that we understand that Jesus is the ultimate source of truth, and that Moses came to bring a lot of information about God that we needed, but he came in the form of law, and that Jesus came to teach us about God in the form of grace and truth. Tillich says we got to hear that. It's not to create animosity with people of the Jewish faith. That's not the point. The point is to say Jesus came to reveal some wonderful truth about God. And if we're going to call ourselves Christians, it means we're going to rely mostly on what Jesus says. Now, Tillich says that there are 4 phases of truth in the normal adult development. The first is accepting authoritative truth. That's when we are children, and if our parents tell us that the moon is made of cheese, we'll believe that. If teachers, whatever they tell us, they are the authority in our lives, and we accept that. Preachers, we don't mistrust them. Sunday school teachers, whatever they tell us. Grandparents, whoever the coaches, if you're in music, music teachers or drama teachers, these people become hugely important in our lives. And for a long time, we just take what they say to be the absolute truth. And then Tillich says we move into our teen years, to adolescence. And that's the stage when we begin to rebel against these same authorities. We sometimes see that there's competing authorities. We might hear what our science teacher tells us about the beginnings of the world, and then hear the preacher on Sunday talk about the beginnings of the world, and we think, well, they both can't be right. There's competing authorities, competing sources of truth. Our parents may say drugs are bad for you. We don't want you messing with drugs. And then we go hang around with our friends and they say, oh, that's where all the action is. That's where we can find a little bit of joy right now, is if we experiment with these drugs. And we have these competing authorities. And then we begin in adolescence to see that our parents are not perfect. We may see some hypocrisy here and there, or in other adults. Certainly, we see it in adolescence in the government and what it's telling us, or even in law enforcement. And so we begin to go through a phase where we rebel against truth. We may say there is no ultimate truth anymore. It's impossible to believe anybody, and we get kind of sarcastic and sassy about the whole thing. Then Tillich says when we move through adolescence, a lot of times we go into a stage where we just trust in scholarly or scientific truth. A lot of times we go on to college or some kind of higher education. We read more widely. We get infatuated with various intellectual people, and then we may just say, well, only the scientists can give us truth, or only the scholarly teachers, PhDs and writers, and that's the source of truth. And we will reject the church, we'll reject our parents, we'll reject other people that we relied upon as maybe not as well educated and not exposed to all the scholarship that we now have benefited from. And, we then put our eggs in the basket of scholarly or scientific truth. We may even become scientists where, we test hypotheses with various tests, and if they prove to be true, then we think they're true. If they're proven to be false, then we reject them. But finally, Tillich says, once we move through these first three, we eventually get to the level of spiritual truth, where we begin to recognize that there is truth beyond the material, truth beyond that which can be proven in a lab, truth that is beyond the quoting of authorities, truth that is something burning in our heart. And we recognize that there is a spiritual truth that we need to know more about. Now, Tillich says there is a way of avoiding that spiritual truth in two main ways that people avoid spiritual truth. One, which seems a little bit ironic, but he says one way we avoid true spiritual truth is through claiming we have the ultimate truth, dogmatic truth. He says that. Let me read what Tillich wrote. There is no freedom where there is ignorant and fanatical rejection of foreign ideas and ways of life. There is not freedom, but demonic bondage when one's own truth is called the ultimate truth. For this is an attempt to be like God, an attempt which is made in the name of God. You hear what he's saying? He's saying when we feel like we've got the monopoly on the truth, we've got the true revelation, we know everything there is to know about God, the world, the universe, humanity, and any kind of new idea or conflicting idea or competing idea, we immediately just reject and don't study it, don't listen it, don't come to know it and evaluate the merit of it because we have the truth. Now, Tillich says anybody who claims they have the truth, they know the truth, well, they put themselves besides God or in the place of God. I had a great theology professor in my seminary days who said that everything we say about God is like shooting an arrow towards a target. Some of our thoughts get closer to that target than others, but none of them hit the bullseye. We're all still learning about God. We all still have a lot to learn about God. And if we think we've got the monopoly on the truth, we have ultimate truth. And in fact, ironically, we are shutting out spiritual truth. And he said the other way that we can avoid dealing with spiritual truth is just to deny that any truth exists. He says this, there is a second way of avoiding the question of truth, the way of not caring for it. Indifference. It is the way of the majority of the people today, as well as at the time of Jesus. Life, they say to themselves, is a mixture of truth, half-truth, ultimate truth. We can't know the truth. They're very much like Pilate. What is the truth? And I understand that perspective. Maybe you do too, because we get pummeled with so many lies, and people we thought we could trust turn out to not be trustworthy. It's easy to start thinking, well, everybody's lying to me. You can't trust anybody in this world. There is nothing that is true. It's all just perspective. There is the whole thing, the Zen looking at Buddhism, which constantly say everything's in our perspective. The reality is how we see it, not how it really is. And I suppose there's some relevancy to that. But still, there's either, there's a famous little parable from Buddhism about a guy that wouldn't go outside his front door because he thought there was a snake out there. And it turned out it was just a stick. And, the teacher says, so it wasn't a snake that kept him in, it was his perspective, the way he looked at things that kept him from going outside. And I get that. That is true. It was his perspective, but it was either a snake or a stick. There was a reality here. His perspective may have confused him, but his perspective didn't make the stick into a snake. In reality, it was still a stick. And so there is a reality. There is truth that we have to keep looking for and staying open to. And we can't drift into dogmatism or skepticism. Listen again to what Tillich wrote. In other words, he says some skepticism and some dogmatism and a shrewd method of balancing them liberate one from the burden of asking the question of ultimate truth. Really, what he's saying is that rather than deal with truth, we get to a stage where we shut out the truth because we think we already know it, or we think we're smarter than everybody else, or we become so skeptical and dubious that there is truth that we don't pay attention to anybody who's sharing uh, any kind of concept of truth. Tillich wants us to understand that in his view, Jesus provides the truth, but he wants to be very quick about it. It's not what the church teaches about Jesus. It's not some systematic theology that says words about Jesus. Tillich says it's in union with Jesus that we begin to learn the truth. It is Jesus, not what we say about Jesus, that leads us to truth. It says as we stay open to the appearance of the Christ, as we try to live in union with Christ through faith, through discipleship, through putting his way of life into practice. As we do that, as we abide in him, as John so often said, as we try to listen to his voice, we begin to recognize Jesus in sermons, in scripture, in nature, in relationships, in music, in art, in reflection, in meditation, in mindfulness and awareness. We begin to encounter the real one, whom we call the Christ, whom we call Jesus. He says, on this road of staying open, staying mindful and aware to encounter the living Christ in all sorts of places and people and experiences. He says, on this road you will meet the liberating truth in many forms, except you will never meet it in one form. You will never meet it in the form of propositions which you can learn or write down and take home. So he said it's not about getting the right answers to the test about Jesus. It's not about assenting to a set of doctrines about Jesus. No, he says that's a sure way not to meet Jesus. The way we meet Christ is to stay open, stay aware, stay watching and waiting. And then we begin to encounter the very truth of Christ. And Tillich ends his chapter by saying that truth, the truth about Christ, the truth that Christ reveals to us as we live in union with Christ, that is always inextricably bound to love. That the truth of Jesus Christ will always lead us to be more loving. It won't lead us to be more arrogant and haughty and judgmental. Never. It will lead us to be more compassionate and caring and kind. Tillich ends the chapter with this quote, therefore, distrust every claim for truth where you do not see truth united with love, and be certain that you are of the truth, and the truth has taken hold of you only when love has taken hold of you and has started to make you free from yourselves. So if the truth you embrace or I embrace, if the truth we proclaim or claim, if it's making us less loving, we're on the wrong track. We've been misguided, deceived. But if this truth that we herald and practice is making us more compassionate, loving, open, supportive, kind, then we've encountered Jesus, Paul Tillich would say. And Jesus is leading us into all truth, a deeper truth, a lived out truth of love. On the old television drama, The West Wing, two of the characters have a conversation, and one of them needs some help, but he doesn't want to ask for the help, and he's looked in a lot of ways and denied that he needed help. And finally, his friend tells him a little parable. He says, there once was a man, we'll call him Joe. He was walking down the street and he fell in a hole. He couldn't get himself out no matter how badly he tried or how energetically he tried. So he started calling out from the bottom of that hole, help, 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 I can't get out. And the doctor came along and looked down in that hole. Joe said, "Can you help me, doctor? I can't get out of here." And the doctor wrote him a prescription, threw it down in the hole, went on about his business. A little bit later, a priest came by, and the man down in the hole who hadn't had any kind of progress, he hauled out and said, "Father, Father, Father, can you help me? I've fallen down in this hole and I cannot get myself out." And the father, the priest, wrote down a prayer, threw it down into the hole, and went on about his business. A little later, one of Joe's friends came by, and Joe saw him, and he cried out to his friend, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you. I am down in this hole. I cannot get myself out. I don't know what to do. Nobody will help me." And just then, the friend jumps down into the hole with him. And Joe looks at him and says, "Well, now that's the dumbest thing anybody ever did. Now we're both down in the hole together." But his friend said, "Yes, that's true, but I know the way out." Now, in a way, that's what Tillich's saying about Jesus. We don't need necessarily to know a lot more information. We certainly don't need somebody to throw more information down into the hole we've fallen into. That kind of truth or pseudo-truth doesn't help us much. What we need is a relationship with Christ, who will come down into our pain and confusion and brokenness and lead us out in relationship, in love, and in truth. Thanks for joining us for this session. In a few weeks, we'll pick up the rest of the New Being. In our church right now, we are actually not studying the New Being. We're looking at Howard Thurman's book on meditations, and we've been doing it up through Lent. But after Easter, we shall return to finish the New Being Tillich book, and I'll be back with session 6 at that time. Until then, I hope you have a very good Easter, and I hope you have a deep, abiding sense of God's loving presence with you. See you next time.